In a small village where the soil had grown hard and the rains had forgotten to fall, there lived a farmer named Tosin, whose heart remained soft despite the harshness of life. Years ago, Tosin had lost his wife and young daughter to a terrible famine that swept through the land. He had watched helplessly as hunger took everything he loved, and in his grief, he could have easily turned bitter and cold. But instead, Tosin made a different choice. He vowed that as long as he drew breath, no one in his village would suffer alone as his family had suffered. Tosin lived in a small, humble hut with barely enough to sustain himself, yet whenever he saw someone in need, he shared what little he had. When the widow Mama Adisa had nothing to feed her children, Tosin gave her half his meager yam harvest. When old Baba Kunle fell ill, and Tosin brought him water from the distant river every single day. The villagers loved Tosin for his generosity, though many worried he would work himself to death caring for others while neglecting himself. In that same village lived a man named Bakari, as different from Tosin as darkness is from light. Bakari owned the largest compound, the fullest storehouses, and the finest clothes. He had accumulated his wealth through shrewd trading and careful calculation, but his heart had calcified along with his fortune. During the great famine that took Tosin's family, Bakari's storehouses had overflowed with grain while his neighbors starved at his gates. He would stand at his window, watching the hungry villagers pass by, and feel only pride that he had been clever enough to hoard while others had been foolish enough to share. On one particularly difficult season, when the drought seemed it would never end, Tosin found himself with only a single handful of grain left. As he contemplated his own hunger, an elderly stranger appeared at his door, bent with age and trembling with weakness. The old man's eyes were kind but desperate. "Please," the stranger whispered, "I have not eaten in 3 days. Do you have anything to spare?" Tosin looked at his last handful of grain, the only thing standing between himself and starvation. Then he looked at the old man's face and saw his own daughter's eyes in those final days before she died. Without hesitation, Tosin cooked the grain into a thin porridge and gave it all to the stranger, keeping nothing for himself. As the old man ate, color returned to his face, and his eyes began to shine with an otherworldly light. When he finished, he stood straight and tall, no longer bent with age. "I am a spirit of the forest, the god of abundance," the old man said, his voice now strong and resonant. "I walk among humans to find those whose hearts remain generous even in hardship. Tosin, you have given me your last food, the very thing you needed to survive, without hesitation or expectation of reward. Such kindness must be honored." From beneath his worn cloak, the spirit produced a beautiful drum, carved from ancient wood and decorated with intricate symbols. "This drum will provide food for you and your village. Whenever you beat it with a pure heart, intending to feed others, abundance will appear. But remember this, the drum serves only the generous. In selfish hands it brings not blessing but curse. Guard it well, for there are those who would take what they have not earned." The spirit vanished like morning mist, leaving Tosin holding the magical drum. That evening, Tosin gathered the village under the great baobab tree. With trembling hands, he beat the drum, and before the eyes of the astonished villagers, the most magnificent feast appeared: steaming jollof rice, tender roasted meat, fresh vegetables, sweet fruits, and cool water. The children laughed with delight, the elders wept with gratitude, and that night, for the first time in years, everyone in the village went to sleep with full bellies and hopeful hearts. From that day forward, Tosin used the drum to feed his community. Every evening, the villagers would gather, and Tosin would beat the drum, always taking only what he needed and ensuring everyone else was fed first. The children grew strong and healthy. The elders regained their vigor. The village began to thrive again, and at the center of it all was Tosin, whose generosity, had been rewarded with the means to help even more people. But from his large compound on the hill, Bakari watched with growing envy and rage. Why should a poor nobody like Tosin possess such power? He muttered to himself night after night. I am the wealthy one. I am the successful one. I deserve that drum far more than he does. If I had such magic, I could become the richest man in the entire region. His desire for the drum became an obsession that poisoned his thoughts and twisted his heart even further. Bakari began to plot. He came to Tosin's humble home with false smiles and honeyed words, pretending friendship. Dear Tosin, he said warmly, I have been blind to your goodness all these years. Please, let me honor you with a feast at my compound. Bring your drum so we may all celebrate together. Tosin, who saw good in everyone, trusted Bakari's words and agreed. The night of the feast, Bakari served Tosin palm wine mixed with a sleeping herb. As Tosin's eyes grew heavy and he collapsed into deep sleep, Bakari seized the drum and hid it in his private chambers. When Tosin awoke the next morning, the drum was gone. His heart shattered with the realization of what had happened. He had failed his village. The children who had grown healthy would go hungry again. The elders who had grown strong would weaken once more. The weight of his failure crushed him as he returned to the village empty-handed. The villagers' faces fell when they learned the drum was stolen. Some blamed Tosin for being too trusting, others simply wept. Children who had grown used to full bellies cried with hunger. Tosin searched everywhere for the drum, asking everyone, but Bakari claimed ignorance, and there was no proof of the theft. Days turned into weeks, and the village began to suffer once more. Meanwhile, in his mansion, Bakari stood before the stolen drum, his eyes gleaming with greed. Now I will have everything, he declared. He beat the drum hard, demanding food. But instead of the delicious feast he expected, rotten, maggot-filled meat appeared, filling his room with a putrid stench. He beat it again, and snakes slithered from the drum's surface, forcing him to flee. Each time he tried, worse horrors emerged, food that turned to ash, scorpions that chased him, and a haunting voice that echoed through his mansion. The drum serves the generous and punishes the greedy. Night after night, the drum beat itself in Bakari's home, allowing him no sleep. His carefully stored grain began to spoil mysteriously. His wealth started disappearing as deals fell through and investments failed. The drum showed him visions of the people who had starved outside his gates during the famine while his storehouses overflowed, including Tosin's wife and daughter, taking their final breaths while he watched from his window and did nothing. Bakari tried everything. He attempted to give small amounts of food to neighbors, but the drum sensed his calculated heart and refused to work. He tried to sell it, but everyone who touched it suffered instant misfortune. The drum had become his curse, destroying everything he had built through greed. Finally, broken and desperate, having lost his wealth, his health, and his peace, he realized with devastating clarity that all his wealth had brought him nothing but misery and emptiness, while Tosin, even in poverty and hunger, had been filled with love and community. With tears streaming down his face, Bakari carried the drum to Tosin's home. He fell to his knees before the man he had wronged. Tosin, I stole from you. I stole from the village. I have been a monster, driven by greed and pride. I have lost everything, but I deserve far worse. Please take back the drum. I cannot undo what I have done, but I can at least stop preventing the good you were doing. Tosin looked at the broken man before him, and in Bakari's tears he saw genuine remorse. I forgive you, Bakari, Tosin said quietly, not because what you did was acceptable, but because holding hatred would make me like you once were. You cannot give back the weeks our village suffered, but you can choose to be different from this day forward. Tosin took the drum and beat it once more. Immediately, the most glorious feast appeared, and he called the entire village to eat, including Bakari. The villagers were wary of Bakari, but they followed Tosin's example of grace. As Bakari ate with the community for the first time in his life, tears continued to fall. His mansion was gone, his wealth destroyed by the drum's curse, but in that moment, eating simple food with simple people, for the very first time in years, he felt love and comfort in his heart. The village thrived once again under Tosin's care. Bakari, now poor and humbled, and worked alongside the other villagers in the fields. It took years, but slowly, through genuine acts of service and sharing, Bakari learned what Tosin had always known, that true wealth is not what you hoard, but what you give, and that the fullest storehouses mean nothing compared to a full heart. The magic was never truly in the drum, the elders would say. The magic was always in the choice to share what you have, to care for others even when it costs you, and to understand that we are all fed by the same grace, if only we have hands open enough to receive it and hearts generous enough to pass it on.